Hi, everyone. Great to see you all. I think we're about to get started here. I'm just going to give everyone maybe one more minute to walk in, filter in a little bit. But thank you so much for taking the time to come to this session. Very excited to share process mining with you all and what we're working on in the process mining industry. It's a very exciting technology. But before I jump right in, great to meet you. My name's MK. I am an account manager and a supply chain subject matter expert at Celonis. I've worked with customers in a variety of different verticals, so anything from healthcare, pharma, all the way to retail and CPG, though I've spent most of my time in retail and CPG. Prior to Celonis, I had an opportunity to work at a very small startup out of Boston where I operated end-to-end supply chains, so I made every mistake in the book, probably cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars in mistakes, but most importantly, I learned. But that's also why process mining and this industry in general is very important to me. So as far as agenda, this is what we're going to cover. We're going to do a little bit of an intro to process mining, then we're going to jump into a discussion about cost to serve. Cost to serve is one of the biggest initiatives across all industries for this year, just given all of the disruption across the various supply chains. And then we're going to wrap up with some real world examples and like where and how to get started. Sound good? All right. So introduction to process intelligence. How many people are familiar with process mining? Anyone? Fantastic. All right. So process mining is the idea of taking data and using that to visually reconstruct how your process works. So using an object ID activity timestamp, we ingest that data into our platform. And then a lot of times people think of processes as very linear things, right? If you were to describe what you do to get ready in the morning, you would probably say you brush your teeth and you put yourself in your car and you get ready for work. But you're not going to talk about how you let your dog out, went for a walk, put on your socks, etc. So using process mining, we can visualize each and every activity within a given process. So when you apply that to something like logistics or fulfillment or distribution, that becomes an incredibly powerful tool to not only suss out where the most important bottlenecks are, but to truly ensure that you're focusing on the right strategic initiatives to where you can not only visualize your process in one linear form, but across processes as well. So it's those intersection points that become incredibly important. Process mining allows you to surface those insights and truly tackle the things that are causing the most constraint. And it helps you to prioritize them as well. Since we have visibility into the end-to-end process, you can tackle the things that are causing the most pain and having the most financial impact on your business. And then ultimately, also within the platform, we can help you fix those inefficiencies after they're identified through operational apps, prioritized task lists, and automation. So again, being able to identify from a process perspective exactly what is happening within a given business, things that would not necessarily be captured on a traditional report, like carrier behavior, for example, and then being able to categorize and prioritize which pieces of that carrier behavior you want to address. Any initial questions? Okay. So process mining as an industry is growing exponentially. 25% of global enterprises will have a process mining technology by 2026. And actually, I wouldn't be totally surprised if it happened earlier than that. With the rise of AI and the number of AI tools that are out there and available, having that high quality data and ensuring that you're getting those bits and pieces of process knowledge incorporated into those AI models is not only incredibly important, but the accuracy of that data flowing into those models is incredibly important. So being able to see your process, visualize your process, and understand it from an objective, data-driven lens, and then pushing that information into your AI tool allows you to, again, consolidate and ensure that the data you're using to train your models is accurate, as well as having that intimate business knowledge to know that you are addressing the right pieces of the business problem in addition to the IT problems that come along with any type of transformation exercise. And in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of folks in supply chain, the hardest part is those handoff points, right? When you import things into the US, you hand off to a customs broker, that brokerage clears the shipment, and then ultimately it's passed to somebody else. So having visibility into those blind spots, again, is where a lot of the value of not only process mining comes from, but just general visibility as well. That way you're tackling all of the, not just specific handoff points, but you are all operating from a unified data model where you're not having to question the validity of the data and the accuracy of the data. You have identified all of that through your visibility of upstream and also downstream so that you know, again, you are working from a single source of truth and a true single source of truth. Because process mining is a layer that sits between yourselves and all of the actual platforms that you use transactionally, like ERPs, WMS, TMS, et cetera. And it can also push information into your BI tools as well. So again, taking that process information, visually reconstructing how it's working, using that to then identify where those biggest handoff failures are. Thus, you now have a platform that is all-encompassing and gives you the ability to pull lots of different strategic levers while also having the information to back up your decisions as far as that goes. Any questions so far? No? All right. So being able to harmonize your strategy and see the differences between not just your planned and actual, but all of the process-based information for how your actual suddenly doesn't match your plan, again, is the power of this platform. And I think that applying this to cost to serve, having all of the different moving pieces within that simple calculation, again, having that good process-based information, to not only act on those different components, but maybe tackle it in a more strategic way. And a good example of that would actually be a project that I worked on with a very large retailer. They came to us and they said, why don't we have any inventory at the store? We have all of our store associates going out and buying products on store credit cards, or we're emergency shipping everything. Where's the holdup? Why don't we have this inventory available? So instead of just tackling the inventory problem, our team went back and we started to look at their inbound logistics process. So we ended up looking at a subset of the data, about 5% of their supply chain, and we went further upstream to see where they were sourcing it from. And we basically identified that their internal system, which was Oracle OTM, fantastic TMS, was planning shipments, and it wasn't going back and reassessing those planned shipments for additional consolidation opportunities. It was just planning them as another net new. So instead, if you have a vendor who is sending 2 shipments within the same 3-day period, both of those shipments are less than truckload. There was no stop point to say, hey, why don't we consolidate these loads together, thus creating a higher volume and a lower shipment cost. So with our platform, we were able to identify, A, that this was happening, and B, we were able to create a stopgap there to increase the volume in those shipments. And so what that did on the back end is give them a higher volume of products so that they were always in stock of the most important things that they needed. Because the second stopgap was assessing the priority of those inbound shipments once they started to reach their DCs. So again, being able to tackle and prioritize the shipments that they needed the most instead of just operating on a first in, first out receiving operation enabled the team to, again, prioritize the things that they needed the most without receiving too much of those things as well, because we had visibility on the back end to say, hey, these are the products that are going to be out of stock in the next 3 days. You need to receive these items first. So essentially creating that feedback loop from the back of the supply chain to the beginning to not only plan better, but to orchestrate better so that they were really optimizing their spend. And at the end of the day, being able to consolidate those LTL shipments into FTL shipments was about $4 million in savings. And then we took that one step further and we started looking at their utilization and their volume to say, hey, what are you categorizing as fully utilized? It turned out it was about 80%. So 80% is not 100. Having all of those FTL shipments at 100% utilization, as full as they could get, drove an additional 10 plus million in savings for them as well. So not that their operation was not optimized, because it absolutely was, but there was just a small percentage that we could improve it even further, as well as prevent the unintended consequence of having an extremely large volume of materials arrive all at the DC at the same time. The last thing we wanted to do was cause capacity restraints. So again, being able to give them the true lead time, because as I said at the beginning, object ID timestamp. So that timestamp is going to give us an objective view into exactly when that order was placed, to exactly when that order started to be received. So the benefit there again is being able to plan against a realistic lead time and not have to rely on suppliers to always give you not just the lead time, but the production lead time as well. So it made the entire end-to-end operation a lot more lean and a lot more efficient. But how does that play into cost to serve? Those are two of the most critical pieces of cost to serve. I've always operated under the impression that shipping and transportation is about 20% of the total cost of a good, if not a little bit more. Again, with all of the shipping disruption, important to really pay attention to those unintended costs, especially with freight rates kind of being all over the place. I know it went back to somewhat normal there for a little bit, but at the end of the day, the fluctuation is almost impossible to predict. We don't know what the ceiling or the floor is going to look like. So being able to level load that spend and keep track of the spend is incredibly important. And I did mention carrier behavior at the beginning as well. So the other piece of visibility we were able to find is that the carriers are all smart, right? They figured out that, hey, there's an auto approve for accessorial and demurrage fees of $99 or below. So we were able to see where contracted tenders would actually decline the initial tender of the loads, and then they would go and accept the load out on the spot market at a higher rate. So not only identifying that behavior, but then preventing it through automation and notifications to the project team, we improve the the carrier behavior, and then we also decrease their transportation spend because we prevented them from increasing rates by going out to the spot market. So very interesting insights, again, from having the process-based information. I'm not sure that there's a report we could have created that would have identified that the vendors were doing that, or the carriers were doing that, I should say. So being able to look at the downstream effects of that and improve that carrier behavior means we could consolidate lanes and negotiate better rates overall, because the carriers that were performing well were not doing that behavior and then ultimately wanted more of that business. So giving all the ancillary information just made it easier to dispute bogus demurrage fees and, again, have visibility into exactly when things are arriving and exactly when things are departing. But the best way to visualize this is through a control tower. I know this probably looks pretty similar to a lot of the other tools you've explored before, but again, this is powered by process mining. So all of the information here is that process-based information rolled up into a consumable KPI so that you have visibility across your business at a glance. And the information is pushed to these dashboards live, so it's not like a report where you review once a week. This is a live view into your business today. How is it operating? How has it been performing? Are there any strategic decisions I can make right now that ultimately lead to preventing a significant mistake? And then it all starts with the process discovery, seeing how your business works. A lot of times the customers I've worked with have been like, MK, I've thought that this has been happening for years, but I've never been able to prove it. This will come in and suddenly there's evidence behind what they've been saying for years. In some of my experiences, I've worked with some fabulously talented merchandisers who could almost predict the number of units sold down to single units. But what we couldn't tell was what is happening in the DC that creates such a disconnect between the units ordered and the units received. We always thought it was just poor reporting or poor data quality leading to those discrepancies. But the reality was that the vendors were sending damaged materials and we weren't charging them back, and we had no visibility into what vendors were just sending low quality goods, which leads to lower customer satisfaction, lower sales. But again, being able to roll out a global strategy for quality management to ultimately improve their performance allowed us to not only make those changes, but drastically improve the quality of the products we were selling to customers. And so having the root cause impact and analysis performed as well, being able to roll up all of the opportunities into a concise list of, hey, what is affecting my transportation process? I have some load consolidation opportunities, I have fines and fees, et cetera. Being able to see the end-to-end financial impact of what each of those opportunities is allows us to prioritize and really address the things that are most important across the business and to decrease transportation spend. And going one level deeper, being able to slice and dice that data and see it kind of however I need, but also rolled up in a way that allows me to, again, prioritize and visualize where the biggest opportunities are, as well as get very granular down to a SKU level to investigate, okay, is this vendor changing price, changing ready to ship date, within a couple of days, or are they canceling the orders at the last minute? Again, just being able to see the variation in process from vendor to vendor and benchmark similar suppliers or even similar stores and get that level of detail both from a shipping and receiving perspective allows you to target specific areas of opportunity, whether it's just more training for the team or if it's even further upstream and learning how to plan better so that you're not receiving all the goods at the same time, thus decreasing your ability to process all of those in time. And then at the end, being able to optimize. It's one thing to find these problems, it's another thing to fix these problems. Being predictive and be able to fix them before they occur is kind of our ultimate goal, right? So having a notification to say, hey, I think there's a bigger opportunity here. If you approve, then you can decrease your spend on this one shipment by, I don't know, $5,000. But then scaled across a large enterprise, I mean, that savings becomes pretty significant. So being able to handle ad hoc changes and not have to go back and panic, evaluate some of your spot shipments and know exactly which leg of transportation or carrier that you need to use for some of those unexpected or unintended changes, again, is incredibly valuable for your end-to-end supply chain performance. And so to be able to execute those recommendations, providing some automation to where the business can actually go in and automate a lot of these steps on their own with a truly low-code, no-code interface, again, allows them to tackle the most important pieces to them, as well as support from our teams. So I work with Celonis. Celonis is a process mining platform, and I think what makes Celonis unique compared to some of the other vendors is that we have a team of value engineers. That value engineer is an industry expert who is dedicated to you and making sure that you're getting value. That value engineer is going to go in and make recommendations about automation opportunities within your business. So again, being able to use that automation and use it however you need instead of paying for a costly implementation and just being able to fix the problem at hand, again, incredibly valuable, as well as the prioritized task lists that come as a result of mining all of the data on the front end. Any questions? Yes?
I saw on your slide that you mentioned that it's pulling this information from a combination of ERP, TMS, and WMS.
Yes.
So a lot of companies maybe aren't using TMS and WMS. Is there a workaround from pulling raw data from somewhere else? Like, how would they get the value of this if they haven't invested in it?
I'm so glad you asked. So it's source system agnostic. I can pull data from, I have yet to personally run into anything I can't connect into, but I've pulled data from data lakes, I've pulled data from Excel spreadsheets, pulled data from emails. We can get data from just about anywhere. We can connect via API. We can also connect to any homegrown ERP as well, or homegrown system, whether it is an ERP, TMS, WMS, et cetera. So having the flexibility and ability to do that is also somewhat unique. I'm sure you've heard a million people say it's source system agnostic. This is the one tool I've personally worked with that is and seems to be source system agnostic. So again, being able to make those connections into some of the more unique or homegrown systems is incredibly valuable to these companies because that's where others have fallen short. Great question. Any other questions? Yes.
Can you give an example of how companies have, once they work with your value engineer, how have they been able to learn those skills internally to continue or sustain it?
Fantastic question. So the way that we work at Celonis, we recommend starting a center of excellence. And now that's very scary to some net new customers. That's a big investment. It takes a lot of time. So in the interim, the value engineers do become that pseudo center of excellence. But traditionally, we also assign a process owner, and that process owner sits alongside and learns from the value engineers, and then they create a program or just a system so that as folks transition from using the tools they've used for any number of years to operate the business, as they move into the platform, there's a certain amount of training and enablement that's necessary. But also, since the business process is changing and moving, having it all consolidated into the platform kind of opens up a very organic need and want to grow this center of excellence. I've also found that a lot of our customers get really excited when they start to achieve that value, and with excitement comes more opportunities more broadly across the business. So having that centralized group who knows about each and everything happening within the platform just means you can be not only more strategic, but more thoughtful about the specific use cases you're addressing, because all of them are going to have ancillary effects, both upstream and downstream. It's supply chain, so everything upstream affects downstream, everything downstream affects upstream. And again, having that single source of truth or single group that's aware of everything happening and all of the improvements, again, make it more strategic and easier to continue on that path. Anything else?
What's your biggest challenge through implementation?
The biggest challenge through implementation. So it really just depends customer to customer. It depends on the relationship with IT. It depends on the understanding of the data and the meaning behind the data for the business teams that we're working in. I would say that the biggest challenge I have personally run into during an implementation is having a data dictionary where everybody is on the same page about what does this field and column mean and what is the impact. At the beginning I said single source of truth where everybody knows the data is correct. It takes a lot of work and effort to get to that point. But when you do, having a unified data model where you can take it to any department within your business and have a discussion without the need to go back and validate data sources or question the accuracy of the data is also incredibly powerful. It saves a lot of time, and it makes sure that everybody is operating off the same baseline of information. So I guess the challenge there was just the time it would take to implement and the willingness of people to collaborate and validate that, yes, we have identified the correct column, and yes, we've identified the correct improvement opportunity as far as value goes. Great. Yes?
What's the typical time frame from start of one of these projects to the automation process? I know they can be all over the board.
Yeah, also a great question. Entirely depends on the number of systems we're connected into. So I have some customers who have one system, one process. That's about 4 weeks, even for a homegrown system. If I have 2 systems and 12 processes, it's probably going to be about 12 to 16 weeks. Again, having the flexibility and a lot of pre-built connectors that allow us to just download and connect saves a lot of time on the front end, but you're going to make up for that saved time with the data validation and the, oh, is this actually correct pieces on the back end. But the difference between this and your traditional like business process mapping is that you skip right to the end. As soon as I have that system connected, let me give an example with SAP. If I connect into SAP, I can have a process map within about 10 minutes once that connection is established. So again, being able to take that very high level process information and make it granular and accurate based on data instead of interviews, that's where the initial power comes from. Again, being able to see that timestamp and that timing information, we target those highly repetitive activities like issue payment hold or issue credit block. That's something I could automate on day one. I could say, hey, there's a credit block on this order, send an email to my key stakeholder, and you can build that in about 5 minutes. Yes? Oh.
It's okay. Question is, if you take one process, how long and how many users needs to record the process to create the map?
How long and how many users to create the map?
Yeah, exactly. Because process mining is that you have the process and then several users who are executing the process, they need to record the process, I don't know, through user interface or how you do, and then based on this you create the process map, correct?
So it uses the transactional data that actually comes from those users being in a system, and then if there were steps that were outside of the system that we're connected into to create that process map, that's where we would start to have a couple conversations about those black holes or those black boxes with those specific users to say, hey, I can see you exited the system for about 3 hours, and then there was an order update made. What are you doing in that 3-hour period? And then, again, having visibility to the end-to-end process, we can kind of judge whether it is worth the time to dig in there and understand what they were doing. But we don't need people to create the process map. It's entirely data-driven and then augmented by input from the folks who actually operate the process.
Yeah, but how many workers you need to analyze because, for example, 5 people are executing the process, right? The same process. So you need to analyze each of them, for example, for 3 weeks or for 4 weeks in a row.
I think it just depends on what process it is. We don't necessarily need to analyze each and every person because we can see their user information within the full process map. But if each person is responsible for like a different portion of that process, we would certainly speak with all 5. But traditionally, it's we have a single process owner who is kind of like over the entire user group or the entire group performing that process. And then we meet with those subject matter experts to make sure we're augmenting the information we're supplying with the actual activity names, with the actual impact of each and every step within that process. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
This is specifically regarding the shipment consolidation case that you mentioned. So how do you handle cases where, like in case of LTL shipments, freight class is a concern. So does this product take into consideration, freight classes while consolidating them into a single full truckload?
Yes. So everything about this tool is configurable. So if you can only ship popcorn on Monday and Wednesday, the third Monday and Wednesday of the month, every other month, that is something we can configure in the back end so that this is going to make reasonable recommendations. There's also AI and machine learning in the background of those operational apps. So as your teams start to leverage them more and more, it's going to learn from the input of your users and stop making recommendations for things that don't make sense, like in the example that you gave. And it's also going to start making recommendations for things that are even maybe a little more strategic than optimizing just the load. It's going to optimize the product mix so that you're also taking into account consumption on the back end and making sure on the front end you're shipping the things that you need the most in the way that makes the most sense, whether that's by ship, by truck, by train. We can do multimodal. We can, again, configure the platform however the business needs, and that's the power of it, being able to basically write out exactly what you're looking to solve for and then having a customized solution that meets your needs.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the data accuracy and the data. So how this platform and you guys are able to identify if there is any data errors in the systems and how you deal with them?
Fantastic question. So I am working on a project with a large retailer right now. This is actually an accounts payable, so very different from transportation and logistics. But their accounts payable system is essentially a copy of their procurement system and their receivable system. So in one system, we're seeing payment terms of X. In the other system, we're seeing payment terms of Y. And so the way to resolve those issues is to bring everybody in the room and say, hey, we're looking at your vendor master, we're looking at the system here, we're looking at the system here. All 3 answers are different. What is the truth? And then we proceed to have a discussion, and whatever the truth ends up being, we can push those updates out to those respective platforms so that it's synonymous all the way through. And we are operating from that single source of truth. But that's something that Celonis is going to do on day one. It's going to surface and say, hey, I think there's a data quality issue here, and it's going to list out for me my 3 different terms by vendor and say which one is correct. And then you go through and you explore that with your user group. And then I would say the hardest part is change management and understanding the perspective of each and every person who has an opinion on what the right answer should be, and balancing that with what the strategic answer or the most optimal term would be in that case. I've seen that happen with shipments as well, where you have carriers in the same lane offering drastically different prices for routes. Again, being able to take that objective information and say, well, you've been late on the following orders and you rescheduled us on the front end this number of times, and giving them an objective carrier scorecard, not only for their own improvement, but to negotiate a lower rate for yourself. That becomes very powerful because a lot of our customers haven't had access to a global strategy or a global solution before, or even visibility into the fact that all of these things are happening, because there are people responsible for inbound and there are people responsible for outbound, and it's almost never the same person or the same group who look at both. So having a space and a way to discuss what is actually happening and taking the pride and the need to create a report piece out of it actually opens the door to quite a bit of improvement very quickly because everyone's on the same page using data. Yes.
So does this product provide rates at shipment level? So if the shipment has to move from, let's say, point A to point B, does it say, okay, this is how the market is and this is what you're paying, and you're paying, like above or below the mark? Does it provide that insights?
So if you configure it to, yes. This platform is going to be as good as the data is provided, and as good as the data it's provided is vetted for accuracy. So if there is a model that you possess that kind of predicts what the shipment prices is going to be, we can connect into that, or we can build one ourselves based on historical information. We could also connect to an API that pulls that directly into your model as well. So to answer your question, yes, and we would be able to configure it to capture the price changes that you would want to see or identify the carriers you would want to target the most. Again, the platform's flexible enough to customize the solution to the needs of the business, and if that is a business need, then we would make it happen.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Great. So as another real world example, we worked with a very, very large CPG company who seemed to have a disconnect in the planned versus actual. Not only was there a disconnect, but they have tried each and every way to suss out the metrics they needed to measure in order to identify where the problem areas were. And using Celonis, we discovered that they were spending about 40% of their transportation spend on intermill shipments. So being able to understand why they were transferring shipments back and forth so often and with such expense, very important to streamlining that operation. And then overall, transportation accounted for about 60% of distribution costs, which was their highest cost bucket for that year. So being able to combine efforts from all of the teams who are working to decrease the distribution costs and give them visibility into exactly what was driving the change from plan versus actual cost, created a repeatable, scalable model, again, a global strategy for addressing the changes, but most importantly, why those things were happening so that they could not only address the why, but improve upon the why, so that next year they're not going back and doing a retrospective analysis, they are preventing these things before they're happening, and just generally being more proactive, which led to a $20 million plus impact for their business, and I think even $5 million before the end of this year, and they have just started to roll this out. So being able to assess the flow conformance and not only assess but visualize and see again those specific nodes that were preventing them from reaching their planned movement pattern, which as you can see in this image, their planned movement is significantly more simple than the actual movements. Again, being able to analyze that network execution and look at the dimensions of freight costs, the volume, and the length of the total haul, and ultimately quantify what the deviation from the plan and how that is going to impact them not only today but in the future is the value of that exercise and where the value came from. And then to incorporate AI into that through both chatbots and agents, being able to have the chatbot interface where the users can go in and say, where am I going to find more inventory, and have that work more like your ChatGPT type interface, but it's all contained within their own environment, in their own space, and have that just be provided as far as like a chat answer. Again, drastically simplified the amount of time they spent or needed to spend understanding what was happening. And they were given a direct answer that was based on data and strategy instead of, kind of the hallucinations that I'm sure we're all familiar with ChatGPT. And then the agent is a pretty interesting addition to that as well, being able to see or provide high-level instructions and then have that agent be able to carry out those pretty simple automations on their own. Again, even further simplified the need and want for a ton of people in there and investigating. Being able to configure that agent to go and take care of some of those more simple activities by themselves was incredibly valuable as well. And then the final iteration of of that project is going to be autonomous appointment scheduling. So taking those agents, taking those triggers and the automation is going to even further improve and streamline that logistics operation I was just discussing. So having somebody to proactively identify risk and suggest like the optimal delivery date based on consumption and planned delivery date and incorporate all of the delays that happen in upstream. Keeps everybody downstream informed and just generally improves the flow, right? Because if you know exactly when something's going to arrive down to the minute, you're going to have dock workers on hand, you're going to have space ready to go and store those goods in, and then at the end of the day, you know exactly when, you know if you're going to be able to fulfill the outbound orders, which is the most important part. So again, taking that upstream data, understanding the process, prioritizing the different activities that are going to be most impactful to the business overall, and then applying some of the tools on the back end to actually fix the problems that were identified, creates the streamlined operation and ultimately leans out each and every step in the supply chain. And then the next question I always get is, how do I get started? And the answer is you look for your most mission critical priority in the year. I'm positive that all of the other process mining platforms will say this as well. You will get in-quarter results because you're going to be able to see what your process looks like. And there are some things that you can just take right off the top as far as working capital and pretty low-hanging fruit with P&L. And applying it to some mission critical priority for the year gives you the funds back to do something more strategic next year in any area of the business. And then having a plan going into it for change management, I would say that the platform is good, but it's only as good as people's willingness to change what they're doing. Celonis will give you visibility into the intended consequences, but also the unintended consequences. So if there are folks who are going outside of what the intended change was, you would be able to see that in real time and follow up with them, provide additional training opportunities. But more importantly, we all know that change is hard. That's why at Celonis we have that value engineering team who is more than willing to meet with you every single day of the week to make sure that you have what you need and that you are making progress towards the strategic goal. That's why the mission critical piece is also critical to being successful in these projects. We want support. And most importantly, we're as excited as you are to find, frame, and fix those inefficiencies. So, and then approaching all of this as kind of an iterative type project. This is not a one and done fix. This is, okay, we've fixed this process is operating the way that it should. Now I'm feeling a little pain down here because I've optimized my logistics process. I'm consolidating all of those loads. Now I have way too much volume coming in at the same time and I don't have anywhere to put anything. So approaching process mining in general as something that's very iterative, not just a one-time thing, is incredibly important to not only getting value, but continuous improvement and getting better across the board. These are also some of the best things I can pass along as well. Start small, go in with an idea of one specific thing you want to address. If you want to consolidate loads, then that is what you should focus on. As soon as you see your data in a platform like this, I've seen it with every customer I've ever worked with, you get really excited. You're like, oh, look at all these things up here, look at all these things down here I could go and address. If you start small and work on one process at a time, at least to start, you're going to get the most value and you're going to get the most strategic value as well, because you're going to have a focus for everyone working on the project and you're going to focus on driving those improvements, which just opens up the door to net new improvement opportunities from there. And then we don't know what we don't know. So if you go in with that mission critical priority, you've started small, and then all of a sudden what you thought was happening is not at all what is actually happening, be flexible. Explore that, understand it. This is a data-driven tool, so the data's the data, nobody can change it. Having the ability to just go with the flow and understand, okay, well, here's what I thought, but here's the reality. Addressing the reality is just as beneficial, regardless of whether it aligns to your initial priority. And I think that is also a place where I would say a lot of customers struggle a little bit because they've gone in under one impression. What we uncovered was not at all what they anticipated, and then the project drastically changes. So again, at the end of the day, being outcome focused and be very thoughtful about where you go next and how you approach each and every step means you're going to have a successful project. And that's kind of all I had. Any other questions? No?
I like to mention before everyone leaves, please be kind and take a moment to go into the app and give MK and Celonis a great rating for the great session. And any feedback that you guys have, please share it in the app. Thank you.